Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here today, and it's a perfect celebration for Disability Employment Awareness Month. And I really just wanted to start out by sharing my disability identities. My whole life, up until about a few years ago, I strictly just identified as a person with a physical disability that is dwarfism. But about a year and a half ago, unfortunately, I lost my 6-month infant son and really started to empathize with the mental health community. I know a lot of people with physical disabilities may kind of identify as struggling with mental health at an earlier age because we're reminded every day that we're different. But it took me up until having a loss for me to find more of my identity in that space. And a little bit more recently, in July of this year, I started struggling with my bladder and my leg stability. And in August, I had to have major back surgery where I had a fusion and a laminectomy, pretty much taking up a majority of my spine to alleviate the compression that was happening, preventing me from walking. And I currently identify as someone who uses a power wheelchair. It's very possible that I could use a manual wheelchair if there were wheels that were big enough that I could reach. I do have strength that I'm gaining back in my legs and arms, but right now it's just making sure that I save the energy I need for physical and occupational therapy to get to where I need to be before I fully rely on a walker and being more independent physically. And I know that there are some people who face the current state I'm in, and that is their life for the rest of their life, and they find ways to adapt. But I just wanted to share a little bit about that before I go into my story, because even as someone who's lived with a physical disability my whole life, adding additional parts to my identity when it comes to different types of disabilities has been a challenge. And I kind of thought that I had it figured out as someone just with a physical disability, adapting to a world that wasn't quite made for me, but it just kind of came naturally trying to adapt. And now, even if I get back to a baseline state, being able to stand back on my own independently, I still need to use step stools to be able to access most tasks in my everyday life. So I'll start from the beginning. I was born into a family where there's no history of dwarfism. So about 80% of people like me are born into families where there's no history. And that's where the media plays a crucial role in how people like me are perceived. So historically, little people have been portrayed as leprechauns and elves and fictional characters that you may naturally feel like it's okay to laugh at. And then if that perception that people see and consume is what they see before meeting someone like me in public, they may react in the same way that they do when they're consuming that content that may not be that authentic or accurate. But that is all the knowledge they have when it comes to people with dwarfism. So this also includes new parents. When I was born at the hospital where I was born in the Massachusetts, Boston area, I was in an environment where very few people had seen an actual little person. There was one person in the hospital who worked there, not the person who helped with the delivery, but just someone who happened to work at the hospital who could kind of tell based on my features that I may have dwarfism, but it wasn't confirmed right away. My parents were nervous. They were scared. They didn't know what that meant. Okay, so they have this child with dwarfism. Are they going to be just like what they see on TV shows and in movies? And is that going to be a challenge for them to manage the emotions that come with constantly having to remind your child that you're different, but you can do whatever you need to do? We just need evidence that there are other people like you out there that are human beings. So after my parents left the hospital where I was born, we were referred to a geneticist at another hospital. And when my parents got to that hospital for the appointment, they met with the receptionist who gave them directions on how to get to the geneticist's office. And the receptionist said, you need to follow the signs down the hall that say birth defects, push the button in the elevator to the birth defects floor, and then you will go down the hallway and see another sign that says birth defects, and your counselor will be there waiting for you. My parents' blood was boiling. They were really frustrated that they were seeing these signs and did not want to be told that their child had birth defects. They also knew that a lot of other parents who may have a child born with a difference don't want to hear the word birth defects or see it. So they met with this genetic counselor, but I don't think they remembered anything that was talked about in that meeting because they were so frustrated about the signs and how that genetic counselor was branding themselves. So after they left the hospital, they decided to send a letter, and they convinced the hospital to change those signs to genetics, because tell it like it was. Be real about the communication and what you're there to do. You're there to help your families who come in navigate their new normal. So after they did that sign or were able to make those changes, they became a resource in the local town where I grew up, about 12 miles south of Boston. And there were families that would call my parents if their child had dwarfism, and my parents were able to let them know about me and maybe be honest about the hesitations they had at first, but the resources they were able to find and the belief that they had in themselves when it came to raising me. And a lot of that kind of mindset took about 6 months. At 6 months of age, my parents signed me up for a sleep study in Baltimore, Maryland, and we were able to get into a practice where there was a doctor who just specialized in caring for little people around the world. The doctor had a full waiting room full of people, and my parents were able to get in for an appointment because they entered his waiting room and they had a ghostly, scared look on their face. He was willing to take them into his office right away in front of the waiting room of people and give them the advice they needed to feel equipped to raise me. Some of the advice he gave them were, treat her like her older sister. I have a sister who's average height, 3.5 years older. They said, don't treat her differently because that will definitely impact the way that she grows up if you try to give her special treatment. Yes, there were some times where medical things could come up and maybe I required extra attention, but my parents were able to find a balance and help make sure my sister also got that attention to make up for the time that they maybe needed to spend with me at medical appointments. They would joke about going on mud baths. I hated getting dirty, so it was not something that sounded exciting to me, but it was a way for them to take my sister out places like Burger King or just fun stuff that she could do and have one-on-one time with my parents. And they also said try to keep her in the same school district and school system. So I was able to really stay in the same town. I know not all families can control this because jobs may cause them to have to move different places, but I was able to stay in the same school system. So I got to know a group of people who I continue to know through my 12 years of school. I was even able to have a friend who was in my class from preschool to 7th grade. As a kid, it just seemed like a coincidence that every year we were assigned to the same class, but our parents worked together behind the scenes to make that happen. But that really helped me feel that I wasn't being bullied in school because I had one person to look out for me. I'm also a little hard of hearing in my right ear because it's common for people with dwarfism to have ear tubes in and out, and there was a complication that happened with one of my surgeries, and I just joke that maybe people were making fun of me and I couldn't hear them. So that was one benefit of having a little bit of hearing loss. And then there was one time where I did get prescribed a hearing aid and I got really frustrated because I just didn't want to stand out more than I did. So my father told me that as long as I sit in the front of the class and pay attention and get good grades, then I wouldn't have to wear it. So now even when I go to presentations, I just naturally sit in the front so I can consume all of the information that is being told to the audience. So having that friend was super helpful. Then I had a few accommodations. I had a step stool around one of the toilets in the public restroom that girls could use. And it was funny because a lot of other kids ended up really wanting to use that stall with the step stool. I think people forget that some accommodations for one person end up being accommodations that are helpful for others as well. There was also a requirement just so teachers could keep track of the students. One boy, one girl goes to the bathroom at a time, but I was able to have an extra bathroom pass just because it took me a little longer to go to the bathroom, and sometimes the sense of urgency came on faster. So I had that permission to go to the bathroom whenever I needed to. I had untimed tests. Untimed tests are equal to time and a half. So it's not that you get unlimited time to complete tests, but like state exams, like the Massachusetts MCAS tests, I was able to have a little extra time to complete. And then another accommodation was books. They can get really heavy in my book bag and can put a lot of pressure on my back. So I was able to have a set of books in my classrooms and one at home, so I wouldn't fall behind in keeping up with homework with the books that we needed at home. There were some medical complications that took place during my school years. I was bow-legged when I was born, so it was known that I needed to get bone taken out of my leg to straighten them out, and that was at about 3 years of age. That was before it may have been interruptive to my school years, but then when I was in 7th grade, when I was close to finish growing, I had bone taken out of my pelvis and put back in to straighten out those legs and build more stability. And then when I was 15, I had lost the ability to walk, similar to what I've experienced recently, and I had to have 7 pieces of my lower vertebrae removed, and I missed 29 days of school. And what was so hard for me was missing school. I was more afraid of missing school and falling behind than having major back surgery. Since the doctor had recommended that my parents keep me in the same school system, I started to realize it was even more important for them to keep me in the same grade. So it was offered for me to take the rest of the school year off because my surgery was in October of my sophomore year in high school. But I was really persistent that I needed to stay with my grade. And I ended up missing 29 days of school, had some tutors to come help me out. I had to go back a level in classes from honors to college preparatory, which was another hard thing for me to accept. But once I got to back to school, I got back on track and was able to graduate on time with my class. I ended up applying to 9 colleges, and the one I chose was Providence College in Rhode Island because I actually saw a little person who was in the cafeteria when I was going on tour there. And I thought, you know what? This is an environment where there's going to be one other person like me. This environment has adapted to having a person like me in it. And that is enough of an educational moment for me to feel like I can be included and belong here. Fast forward to when I was getting ready to move into school, I participated in this program called Urban Action, where it's a great way to get to know people a few days before going to school. And we cleaned up a farm nearby, and there was about 150 people who were about to be freshmen. And something I had done even in my earlier years, stay really active in the community, student council, sports, just to make sure that I made it known that I was an active participant and wanted to be included, did not want to be given a break. I wanted to have a chance to participate just like everyone else. So when I got into this program, it was a great way to get to know people in advance of moving into school. One of my roommates, who I was assigned to, was not part of that program, so I was going to meet her after this program. We got along really well on the phone, but right when we got to school, she freaked out because I didn't give her any warning that I was a person with dwarfism because I didn't feel like I needed to. I'm a human. We got along great on the phone. Why do I need to tell her that? I wasn't expecting her to help me and baby me. I just wanted to have a friend and thought we got along great. But she got really nervous and scared, and when she moved her stuff into the dorm room that I had already moved into, she ended up pushing all my stuff in the corner, even though I had already had it set up in a certain way. So it was about 6 months of constantly having to prove that I'm not going to come out and scare her, and that we have the potential to be friends if she just accepts the fact that I look different. But then after that 6 months, I was thinking about moving out and there wasn't an opportunity. So we were able to get along a little better for the remaining 6 months of the year. But it wasn't easy. But during that urban action program earlier on, I had met someone who then became my roommate for the rest of school. And it was a breath of fresh air because something I think that comes up a lot is we build all these relationships with people with disabilities and we're excited to have them in our lives, but we don't necessarily provide the feedback that they need to be successful. It's like people with disabilities tend to be othered, and people are just excited for us to show up, and they may call us inspirational. You're so inspirational. There's nothing you could do wrong because you're looked at differently and you're just going to kind of operate over there in whatever way you operate. But this friend became someone who's a really close friend of mine, my best friend to this day, because she was willing to give me the feedback I needed to continue to improve as a human being. So there was one time when we went to the grocery store together and we had to walk because it was the only way we could get there in Providence. We walked through a few neighborhoods and she had me hold a few of the bags that we got because it was both of our groceries. And we were walking down the street on our way back to our dorm, and she just told me to hurry up. And someone else was driving by and they said, she's trying as best she can. But my friends knew what I was capable of and knew that I was distracted and that I could walk a little faster. She wasn't telling me to do something that was impossible, but there was a way for me to do a little better. And she may continue to do that when we take trips together, just making sure that I don't kind of rely on her to do things that I'm fully capable of doing. And I've really appreciated our friendship because of that and that honest feedback she's provided. So as a marketing major in college, after about 2 years in school, I decided to really focus on internships related to the entertainment and media industry. Providence wasn't a really famous place for entertainment type jobs, but it was an opportunity for me to learn a little bit about how much that industry influences society. So I started out working for an ad agency that helped the general public and movie companies work together to identify areas for improvement in films that weren't yet released. So you take a film like Happy Feet, bring a target audience, all different types of families, to come to an advanced screening. People love to go to a free movie, love to provide feedback if they're given the opportunity to do so. And then I would write notes on how people reacted to the film. The studio would then take those notes, make any tweaks they needed to before the wide release. And through that experience, I just started learning like, wow, people are taking this really seriously and people pay attention. And then from that, I was given an opportunity to work at the NBC affiliate as a promotions and publicity intern, just writing scripts that news anchors would talk about different events that were happening in the community that they were sponsoring. And from that opportunity, I was asked if I would be a stand-in on the movie Underdog that Peter Dinklage was filming it was actually filming in Providence in 2006 summer timeframe. And that aligned with my senior year in college, the last 2 weeks. So I had to report to set before finishing college. And my parents, who had helped pay for my college education, did not want me to miss out on graduating. And I needed to make sure that was a priority. So even though I was asked to work on the movie in one capacity, I had still networked enough to ask the casting directors who I was working with if I could still help them out for the summer as an intern. So just for those of you who aren't as familiar with the movie business, stand-ins are when someone is able to act as almost like a double of the person who's the real actor, because that person can be there while the set is being prepared for the filming. So I could stand in a spot where Peter is eventually going to be acting from, but it gives the producers and directors and writers time to visualize the scene before action time. And this is really helpful, especially when there are children on TV sets, because they still require a certain amount of schooling while they're working on set. And this is an opportunity for them to have a quick 45-minute lesson while the set is being set up. And it's been an opportunity for a lot of little people because we are the height of children. Since I did not end up doing that specific role, it was just a way for me to learn about different aspects of the entertainment industry. And a little earlier in college, before my senior year, when I was doing this project, I had gotten involved in an organization called Little People of America. And it was the first time outside of that one little person that was at my college where I was able to put my guard down and be around people just like me. And it was an intentional decision to wait as long as possible to immerse myself in that environment because I felt like I grew up in a community that was so inclusive. But then once I got to school, especially college, it was hard watching a lot of my friends date, and I just wasn't viewed as someone that just your average student would date. It was more because of my appearance. It just wasn't looked at as a possibility. And this gave me an opportunity to be around people like me, even for friendships. And some of the people I met have been really close friends to this day. And a lot of them started out in Southern California. And that was one of the key factors that motivated me to move to Los Angeles right after this casting experience. I was offered a job to work for a talent manager who also happens to be a little person. But by the time I got out to California, the job fell through. And I had to figure out how I could still stay out there. My parents told me before I moved that I needed a job and a place to stay in order for them to support my move. So I had secured the job, I had secured a place to stay. Once we got out to California, the job fell through. What I ended up doing was treating every day like a job, looking for a job. Over the course of 4 months, I sent out 1,000 resumes, went on 100 interviews, sometimes up to 4 interviews a day. During this time period, I look back and think, if at least one person could give me constructive feedback to tell me that I was a terrible interviewer, especially sometimes driving around Los Angeles traffic to 4 different places in a day, I would accept that that was the reason why I didn't get any of those jobs. But nobody gave me the feedback I needed to do better in the next interviews. And no one told me why they weren't hiring me for jobs that I was fully capable of doing, since my resume got me in the door for an interview. So it was assumed because of my short stature that I was being denied these opportunities. There were times in interviews where it was pretty obvious that someone was shaking in my presence and I was not going to make it the next step in the interview process. But at about the 4-month mark, I was able to apply to some temporary placement agencies where I could interview there and they could just send me places to work. And that, I think, is a nice model for people with disabilities, as long as there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I say this because sometimes people can be pigeonholed into internship after internship, and it may not lead to an actual full-time opportunity with benefits. But I was able to find some jobs that started as a temporary position with the potential of being a full-time hire position. I did a few small jobs where it was during the holiday season back in 2006, and one was working at this place, Trailer Park, where they make trailers for movies. So I just helped with holiday gifting. Then I worked with the Hallmark Channel for about a month, similar thing, holiday gifting season. But then I was given an opportunity to work at Creative Artists Agency, which is one of the world's largest talent agencies, in the Hispanic marketing department. And I got to the job. Unfortunately, I took French in school, so it wasn't the best fit. But because my boss at the time, she actually grew up as a Latina woman, founded Latina magazine, had faced a lot of adversity up until that point when we met, she believed in me, and she was able to find someone who could work alongside me, who could answer the phone calls that came from the Spanish-speaking clients, while I learned the logistics of the administrative side of the business. And once there became an opportunity in the entertainment marketing department where we were able to advocate on behalf of major brands who wanted to connect with entertainment properties, that became a better fit for me, but she was able to advocate to help me get there. So it was about 7 months that I was a temporary employee at the agency, and then I was able to fight to be hired as a full-time employee with benefits. I stayed in the entertainment marketing department for about 2.5 years, and then I went into the comedy touring department. And the reason I ended up in comedy touring was entertainment marketing was having some shifts, and it was a known fact that I needed to look for another opportunity. I was safe within the agency. I just had to see where it made sense to be. And the opportunity that allowed me to go to the comedy department was they started this comedy club coverage group where we could go out to comedy shows, up to 4 comedy shows a night, to send feedback to the comedy agents who weren't able to get to all those shows in one night. And it reminded me a bit of my internship experience where I'd gone and taken notes at movies. So that was a great opportunity for me to learn about the comedy business, especially someone who sticks out like a sore thumb. Sometimes people would comment about my presence in the audience, and comedians would talk about me in positive or negative ways, and sometimes that would impact the notes that I would send to the agents. At about the 4.5-year mark at CAA, people started asking me what I was passionate about because they knew that most assistants only lasted a talent agency for about a year. And that was when I felt confident enough to start sharing that the reason I want to work in this industry is because I'm passionate about what we see in the media, because it affects how people like me are treated in society, even trickling down to new parents finding out that their child has dwarfism. And one of the partners of the talent agency started sharing with me that he had a father who lived with him for 8 years before he passed away. And his father had acquired a disability through maybe some type of cancer, and he had to have his legs amputated. I asked this partner if anyone else at the agency knew much about that story. Even his clients, he represents very high profile people. Could they maybe even write a story about his dad? But up until that point, he told me that nobody had that information. And he felt comfortable sharing with me, I feel, because I'm open about sharing about my passions and disability. But that really made me feel disappointed, because I think the most successful companies are those that have leaders who are willing to openly talk about disability and their relationship to it, whether they identify as themselves or have a family member or friend with a disability. So I knew that it was kind of a road to nowhere when it came to moving up within the agency, just that disability was still kind of a hidden topic. I was given the platform to host a panel discussion that included people with disabilities who work in front of and behind the camera, and that allowed me to start building my network of those people who are already key players, passionate about changing what we see in TV and film. Still, when I hosted that panel discussion at the agency, only about 2 or 3 people from the agency showed up, but other people from around Los Angeles in other capacities showed up. From that kind of passion building experience, I was asked to work at CBS Television Studios in the television casting department. So I finally took my leap from CAA and worked at CBS for about a year. One of the reasons why I only worked there for a year is I was asked to work for 2 people, and one person recruited me to work there and the other person wasn't on board. So from the moment I started in that position, I was already being pushed out because there wasn't proper communication. And again, I wasn't given the feedback I needed to succeed. So again, it was very possible I was making a lot of mistakes from day one, but nobody was there to give me the guidance I needed to be successful. So after that year, I was feeling really discouraged because I thought that I could start influencing who was cast in TV shows that are produced by CBS and how we can include more people with disabilities in typical roles. It doesn't even have to be described as a disability. It could be a doctor, a lawyer, whatever it may be. But they just weren't open to that. And I think there was still a learning curve that I didn't have the support to go on. So I made the hard decision after 6.5 years of living in Los Angeles to move back home to Boston. Around that same time, I had a roommate who was also a little person, and he was diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. So he needed to go back to home in Georgia. And then I just decided, because of the job situation, I needed to go take a break and go back to Boston. My sister, who I'm very close with to this day, started getting really excited because I was coming home, but I was kind of facing other emotions because I feel like I failed and didn't make it very far in an industry that I was passionate about being a part of. But she told me that she missed me, and as a teacher, she always talks about me to her students. Why don't I come talk to her students and share my story with them? And I thought, who's going to want to listen to me? I can only talk about being an assistant in Hollywood. Like, what's exciting about that? But I started to think of it in a more basic way of, they're excited to see me as someone with a physical disability who's had all these experiences growing up and moved across the country. It didn't matter where I got in my career, but I was able to spread my wings. And even though I came back, it doesn't mean that it's over, and there's a way to still connect with these young kids. So it got me thinking that the more places I share my story, even though I'm not the media myself, hopefully it can help people be kinder to the person they see after me, like me. And we've talked about it even before this presentation. I like to keep track of the amount of people I reach in each of my presentations, because if we start adding those numbers up, they're still not the same as TV views or movie views, but it is a little bit of a ripple that can help make it a little easier for the next generation. And where I really found my niche was going to a parent meeting of parents who have little people children. They can't always control whether they stay in the same town, keeping their child in the same school district, but they can control educating the administrators in each of these new school districts. I was able to go into the school district, talk to the administrators, let them know about the accommodations I had growing up, and then talk to the whole student body. Let them see me, get to know me, and let me answer the hard questions. So then that student, when they make the transition to the school, they'll feel a little more included and maybe don't have to face answering those hard questions. I always say no question to me is offensive. I rather people ask questions and make assumptions. So I continued to do speaking, was asked to go actually speak in Kenya to speak on behalf of a Little People organization. One thing that really encouraged me to go there was I started getting messages from people in Kenya saying they wish they had the confidence level I had. And I said, I want to do everything I can to give you that confidence level. And it was an amazing opportunity to speak to little people from around Kenya and even beyond Kenya about the importance of really feeling good about yourself, even if society tries to make fun of you or tell you that you can't do things. And after that, I realized that as much as I love speaking, it was a lonely experience, especially since I wasn't making a living enough to live outside of the home where I grew up. So I dealt with my own stigma of being an adult with a disability living at home. And I thought, you know what? I am going to figure out how I can apply to jobs that align with what I'm passionate about and what I speak about, but they will also give me an additional sense of purpose. So I was given an opportunity to work at the Actors Union, SAG-AFTRA, in the diversity department in New York City for about 3.5 years. And one of the reasons why I ended up leaving SAG-AFTRA was because there wasn't an opportunity for growth. We are often celebrating people with disabilities as new hires, as a great addition to an organization, but we're not enough encouraging them to move up the ladder. And then I was given the opportunity to work at another organization where I have been able to receive several promotions, and I feel like I'm valued for the work that I do. So now I'm just going to go into a little detail on etiquette and the importance of disability inclusion. I think sometimes we did not put enough time into this work because we are so afraid of offending the community. So we'll talk about how best to approach people like me and all people with disabilities. So let's just go down to the basics. The American with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990. So this July, we celebrated 33 years. And disability is defined as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, having a history or record of such an impairment, or being regarded as having such an impairment. Examples include physical, mobility, blind, low vision, deaf, hearing loss, intellectual, developmental, speech difficulties, psychiatric, mental illness, learning and attention issues, epilepsy, cancer, diabetes, post-traumatic stress, HIV/AIDS, chronic migraines. Some of you in this audience may not know that you may be experiencing a disability, especially since 75% of disabilities are non-apparent. But it takes for you to be accepting of your disability before you may feel comfortable sharing with others. But I think people like to be reminded that they're not alone. So if you find that opportunity where you hear someone talk about a disability they have that may be similar to yours, it's a great way to start a conversation. Then just a little bit about disability in media, since this is a topic that's super near and dear to my heart. The CDC reports that 26% of Americans have a visible or non-apparent disability. In the GLAD 2021 to 2022 Where We Are on TV report, so when I was at SAG-AFTRA, I was involved in helping write a page that was disability specific within this LGBT report. Only 22 out of 775 primetime regulars had a disability, down from the record high of 3.5% in 2020 to 2021 and 3.1% in 2019 to 2020. So it's even gone backwards. The share of screen analysis from Nielsen Grace Note said that 8.8% of the top recurring cast members in a popular broadcast cable and streaming program represent the disabled community. And then again, as of December 2022, 7,556 video titles included disability themes, but only represent 4.1% of the 183,089 total titles. So there's definitely a lot of room for improvement. And sometimes it just takes having someone who's a content creator who's willing to talk about their relationship with disability, and then it's shown in the content that they create. So a perfect example is one of the people in the photo to the left of the text in the slide is RJ Mitty. He was Walter White Jr. in Breaking Bad. And Vince Gilligan, who was the writer of Breaking Bad, had an experience with someone with cerebral palsy growing up, and he decided to incorporate that person in his storytelling, even though it was fictional storytelling. And he also made sure that the casting directors included an actual person with a disability, with cerebral palsy. And that was RJ Mitty and how he got the role in that show. So when it comes to language, because I think sometimes we're always dancing around language, what's the terminology we should use? I often tell people, just call me Becky, and then we'll get to the rest. But the language, when it comes to disability specifically, there's a little bit of a divide in what the preferences are. So it's not inappropriate to ask someone, what do you prefer? But some people may think people first language, person with a disability, a person who uses a wheelchair, is enough for them. Or someone may say identity first, disabled person, autistic woman. Improper language that I would try to avoid would be handicapped or retarded. Disempowering language is suffering from or confined to. Ableist language, using childlike vocabulary. Sometimes people may think because little people are the height of a child that we are a child, which is far from the truth. So it's important to talk to us like adults as you would other adults. and definitely avoid being insulted or condescending. And then euphemistic language, physically challenged, differently able. We really need to stop dancing around the word disability and find a way to strengthen it so it can be a way that unites all people with disabilities, and it'll make it easier to advocate on behalf of the community going forward. When it comes to dwarfism specifically, because that's my lived experience, Little People of America, the organization I had mentioned I joined at the conference in college, defines dwarfism as a medical or genetic condition that usually results in an adult average height of 4'10" or shorter among both men and women, although in some cases, a person with the dwarfing condition may be slightly taller than 4'10". So the most proper preferred term is our name. You could use little person, LP, person, individual with dwarfism, dwarf, or short statured. I would say improper, midget. It's an outdated, antiquated term that is considered offensive and degrading to the community. Maybe there's someone in your path who you saw a long time ago who may be okay with the word midget, but I would say try your best to avoid using that term because it may not be a great reason as to why they're accepting of it. Just quickly, common courtesies and best practices for interacting with people with disabilities, for accommodations. When setting up an interview or planning an event, ask if participants need accommodations. So this even has to do with the job application to onboarding to interview. Put it out there that you're willing to make an accommodation. You may think, oh, it's opening a can of worms. It's not. Most accommodations are known now to cost less than $300. And as I said, even that step stool in school can help more people than just that one person asking for an accommodation. And what you will find is that people who don't yet identify as having a disability may also be asking for the accommodations they need to feel successful on the job. And it's a reasonable accommodation, so you can work together to find something that works. But if you're communicating out there that someone can make an accommodation request, you're making it known that you're willing to work with someone to find what they need. Also, just make sure you assess the physical location for accessibility during in-person events. I've had a lot of experiences with just my new lived experience as a wheelchair user. There may be some sidewalks where it looks like there's a curb cut, but it still may be about a foot to get down to the street, and it doesn't always feel safe. So make sure you pay attention to those paths, even if they look accessible. For virtual events, ensure the meeting platform is accessible. Set accessibility expectations and reminders at the start of the meeting. Let people know what you have in the room. Again, you'll know what you need in the room if you put it out there that people can make requests. Describe the visual content. Don't interrupt others when they're speaking, so then the captioners can work effectively if you need them in the meeting. Share materials in advance. You can allow people to be prepared for what content is going to be shared. And then schedule breaks for anything over an hour. Encourage stretch breaks as needed. So usually if there is a sign language interpreter that is coming to your meeting, there could be one person for an hour meeting, but if it's going to be over an hour, you would need 2 people so they could switch off. And then for communication, greet people with disabilities the same as you would greet those without. Do not use a different tone. Don't act differently. Just be yourself. And it's okay to use common expressions. Like if you see someone who's blind, you can say, see you later. They will be okay with it. And then just some key takeaways before we jump into questions. Think about how you engage with people with disabilities. Think about how you're engaging with all people. Let's all choose to reach out and do better. You can utilize disability etiquette resources. So the National Center on Disability and Journalism has this great style guide that we should make sure is sent out after this presentation because it allows people to understand all different types of disabilities and the preferred terminology. You can lean on disability inclusion consultants. If you're afraid of putting any content out there, it's okay to ask questions and allow the community to interact and engage. We often say nothing about us without us. If you put the community at the forefront of the focus group when you're trying to target that audience, it'll be greatly appreciated and you'll be set up for success. Engage in this work no matter what your role is. So if you're not in the D&I department, make sure that you're still willing to be inclusive of people with disabilities. Not all people with disabilities want to work in D&I. They may want to work in accounting or marketing or finance. Just make sure you become aware and communicate the fact that you're open to including people with disabilities in those roles. And then in any environment, just think about being kind, because that'll help us all get better together. Back to you, Lauren.
Thank you, Becky. So we have a couple of questions that have come in, and I also want to invite folks. I know we said that we would accept questions over chat, but if you would like to come off mute and ask a question, we fully welcome that. So while you all think about that, I will put the questions out there that have come in so far. The first question is the direct one. So what's next for your career?
I am actually working on a book, Just Call Me Becky, but it's a lot to try to pack it all in. But I'd love to continue to do more speaking and help companies get better with disability inclusion and really make sure there are no barriers. Really thinking back to the resources that my parents could have used when I was born and the examples, and then even the journey I went on trying to find my first job. I hope to see fewer people face that many challenges.
Thank you. And there was one, so this is a little out of order, but I think this kind of plays into the what's next question. So you spoke about your experience in media and the Hollywood industry. Have you ever thought about becoming a writer or producing a show? If so, what kind of movies or shows would you be interested in working on?
That's a great question. I often think about the documentary space because I've seen a lot of little people have taken the path of reality TV, and it's gone in a million different directions, but there's still a little bit about the producers and writers telling your story for you, so then it can still have a fiction element to it, just because they think of what sells. So I would really want to make sure it's where I could be real and honest. So probably going more that documentary route of telling things how they are rather than adding elements that don't make sense to add.
Thank you. Okay. What has been the most rewarding thing about public speaking about disability?
I think the most rewarding thing is when the people who I'm speaking on behalf of see a change in the behaviors of the environments that they're in. So really reconnecting with some of those students who are now in high school, the ones who I started speaking at their elementary schools 10 years ago, and watching them become more confident and feel better about their education and the environments that they're in because they're equipped to advocate for themselves. And then even those who decide to become speakers. I always tell people, I don't need to be the only one. The more out there, the better.
Yeah, hear you on that. Okay, I think this one is a little bit similar, but what was the best or most interesting thing that resulted from doing your TED Talks? Was it difficult, and have you seen any new opportunities as a result?
TED Talks are difficult. I'm very used to speaking from the heart, but TED has a very strict format where you have to have a written script and then memorize that written script. So I would say the first TED Talk I did, I ended up cutting it short because I started getting nervous and forgot everything that I wanted to talk about. Just to keep it cleaner, I just wrapped it up rather than continuing to ramble on. But my second TED Talk, because it was during the pandemic, I was actually able to record it from home. And I used a teleprompter app that allowed me to stick to the script. So it did bring me outside of my comfort zone, trying to write out scripts and really formalize my life experience in different ways and also integrate advice to align with the TED theme. So I think it was a great exercise, and you could tell that there's a lot of prestige behind the TED brand. But one of the best experiences was hearing from one of the talent agents at the agency where I worked. So it was the 2014 TED Talk that I did specifically on disability representation in the media. And he was someone who I didn't really talk to much. He was a high profile agent, and he kind of took the time to watch it and was telling me that if there was anything I needed to do, conversations I needed to have, get casting directors all together to make change, let him know. He was willing to help in any way. So knowing that it can impact people that I didn't even have a close relationship with meant a lot to me.
Thank you. So those are all the questions that were submitted to us. I want to leave space though for folks to come off mute if there are any questions in the audience. Last chance.
Hi, everybody. It's Deb Bobby.
Hi, Deb.
Hey, Becky, thank you so much for your talk. I really thought it was great, and I loved all the practical advice, especially. My question is about accommodations, and especially given, what you said about so many disabilities not being apparent, what do you think employers should be doing in the interviewing process, or just even as people, because people's lives change and disabilities may evolve over time, what should employers be doing to signal an openness to having a conversation about accommodations?
I think it starts with that open communication, even from the job application to onboarding process. But I think even in that accommodation language, you could say, even if you don't need it now, please communicate with us if you need it later once you're onboarded. And maybe that's part of an onboarding orientation packet. But having multiple touch points, even for events, just say, like, if you need an accommodation, let us know. This is also a time where we're coming together, and maybe there's a way to improve the way that your work environment is set up. I think just constantly putting it out there hopefully can be more encouraging to have people come forward and let you know what they need. But I think the requirement in general is when someone's applying for a job, they must be able to perform the essential functions of the job. So you want to keep in mind that piece too, of like, if it's completely off from what they're supposed to be doing, does it make sense to transition into a different type role? Not like they have to get demoted, but really keep the open communication of things can change in life. And if you need to have accommodations and have a conversation, I think there's just so much fear about being fired right away if people come forward and ask for what they need, but they're also at risk for not succeeding if they don't have what they need at any given time. And I think it also ties back to storytelling. Get people to be open about their stories. If there are executives who lived one way and didn't identify as having a disability or need an accommodation, and all of a sudden now life is a little different, make some of those scenarios known, have it even be on the portal that people may access, so people are reminded that they're supported even if things change for them in their lives.
Becky, I wanted to jump in and follow up on Deb's question. I thought it was excellent. How do we, taking it a step further, how do we become a more attractive option for people with disabilities? Or, I mean, we find this in the diversity space. When you don't have a lot of representation, you don't even know you could work in a place like a law firm. And heavens knows we don't have a lot of representation. How is it, going to job fairs? Can we market ourselves a little bit differently so we can be more inclusive?
Yeah, I think what's challenging is that just the law industry in general, and even the entertainment industry that I came from, are very intense and labor intensive, and you have to be honest about those pieces too, because you don't want to mislead someone and they won't be set up for success. But maybe even think about the other departments if someone decides not to pursue law school, because of course those are still requirements in order to be a lawyer. Maybe there are opportunities within the firm that maybe aren't as labor intensive. And I'm not saying people can't do it, but maybe it would be more attractive if there were a range of opportunities versus just thinking that one route of being a lawyer versus HR opportunities, D&I that may not necessarily require that same background. And then I think it's important to think about those 75% of disabilities that are non-apparent. There are probably already a lot of people in the firm that are facing mental health in some way or another, especially after the pandemic. So find ways to have conversations about that will allow you to understand that there are more people with disabilities already in the firm, and that it should be something that's talked about so people feel more supported.
Thank you. And Deb, I hope I didn't cut you off. It was just such a great question. Think about it.
But I think it's
Not at all, Don. I really appreciate that. I think those comments are super helpful.
and maybe you even have a section on the page where you're educating people about like what disability means and your commitment to making sure that people know they're included, whether they don't yet work there or already work there.
Thank you, Becky and Deb and Don. We are just about the top of the hour, so I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. Becky, thank you so very, very much for joining us and for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge and your journey with us. We're so appreciative, so grateful.
Thank you so much.
And I want to thank everyone in the audience. Thank you for joining us today. Feel free to reach out if you have any other questions or any follow-up. We're happy to maybe connect folks with Becky on the side. And if there's anything else that comes up, please let us know. But other than that, thank you all and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.